He's keeping us on task.
That's awesome.
She's got that timely thing about her. She doesn't like to be late.
Purse strings is here. Oh, noon for you. But
it's noon here in Chicago. Yes, we like to be on time. Yeah, and we're welcoming our dear friend Patty, who's got a really amazing topic. Yeah, we're excited about it. So
yeah, it should be a fun time. I remember when I started first learning about like emotions and money, I was like, oh wow, I can see how these really relate. Nuts. It's nuts.
It's nuts how much it relates. I mean, where do we learn everything, right? From growing up, from our experiences, and it transfers over to money and how we manage it. So we're all really curious to see what you have to say on the topic, and we can evaluate ourselves a little bit. So
Awesome. Very cool.
Yeah.
We've got some people jumping in saying good morning. You want to share with us where you're from or how's your day going?
Yeah, we're all, the three of us are across the country. So Maggie, you're in
Cincinnati.
I'm in Chicago. Patty's in
Colorado.
So yeah, we've got lots of different representation here. 3 different weather events, kind of.
Yes.
Hi, Dina.
Nice.
There's Dina.
And then we got Rachel in Chicago.
Hi, Rachel.
So yeah, this is going to be a fun presentation today, and got to build our lineup for the next month. So we got some good stuff coming out. We're very excited for. So
yeah,
some new providers.
Yeah, we got some new providers. So some great, amazing men and women who are ready to serve a female market. So we always say only use purse strings approved providers like Patty is. So yeah, it's exciting.
Wait a couple more minutes for everyone to jump on here, and then we can get started.
Yeah. And let's not forget to pop some questions in the chat. And they just do that right in Facebook, right, Max?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Just ask your questions right there and they pop up. Maggie can see them.
We've been learning so much about social media lately.
I know.
Really learning.
Maggie and I had a social media lesson yesterday. So, you're going to see us popping up a little bit more. Maggie did a great live this morning on Insta to promote your event today, Patty. So that was terrific. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry I missed it.
It's okay. It's really okay.
It's great. She did a great job. Golden.
Yay.
Yeah. Right up the road from you, Patty.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. We could get started this morning. Today we have Patty Bonsera, correct? Is that how it's pronounced? Bonsera, as hosting our Facebook Live. She's a former security trader who became a financial wellness advisor to support women 40 plus. She brings soul care and financial care together in a heart-centered, judgment-free space to help you feel as confident and beautiful about your finances in the same way you do about an afternoon at the spa.
I love that.
She's passionate about helping celebrate midlife and soulful abundance. So as you can see, Patty is going to hit it on the emotional and money today. So we're so excited to have you. Thank you for coming.
Well, thank you both for having me. This is awesome, and I'm super excited about being part of this Purse Strings mission to empower women financially. It's just so needed and so important. So thank you for having me today. I'm very excited to be here, and thank you all for joining us for this talk about emotions, money, and mindset. And so a little bit of background about me. I haven't always lived in Colorado. I actually grew up in a New York Italian family-run business, and basically, so back in the 1940s, my grandfather started his own trucking company after World War II, as Long Island was expanding, and he passed away in 1962. And so my father and my uncle took over. And so when I was about 11 or 12, I began helping my grandmother with like the incoming accounts receivables. And I remember she had these long boxes. I mean, of course, this was, pre-digital anything. So she had these long boxes filled with client cards. And so my job was, as the checks came in from the customers, was to mark off the dates on the cards that they paid and to get everything all organized so she could make the deposits to the bank. And, as an 11 and 12-year-old, it was great. And she paid me. And really, that was the beginning of my financial education. But that's also where it ended. Because at that time, really at the same time from when I was a little girl, we didn't talk about money in our family. I heard messages from my father, these kinds of messages, that money is the root of all evil. Nice girls don't talk about money. And we certainly don't talk about religion or money. And we didn't. My family not only didn't talk about it, but when I was in my 20s, I also witnessed the result of kind of some unethical business dealings from other members of, the extended family. I didn't realize it then, but those mixed messages about money were the foundations of my subconscious beliefs that I carried into adulthood. And I know, for many women in this age group, that previous generation didn't talk about money. And so if you grew up in that kind of environment, there's nothing wrong with you. There are many, many of us that, were not having these open conversations. And so while mixed messages about money from childhood are part of the challenge that we face with our money mindset, it really only scratches the surface. And I read two very sobering statistics earlier this week on LinkedIn. And one was that 80% of financial plans never get implemented by the client. And that 60% of women would rather, and that was, I believe, a Merrill Lynch statistic. And the other was that 60% of women would rather talk about death than money. And that really saddens me deeply because, as you've probably all heard before, and I know Barb and Maggie have heard this too, 80% to 90% of us are going to be solely responsible for our finances in our elder years. So there was an article on the National Debt Relief website, as well as one on Psychology Today, that really talks about the differences in how men and women are wired about money. And there really, there isn't a woman that I know who wants to live her elder years being financially dependent on family, friends, or the government. And I'm not saying that men do either, but for women, that sense of financial security creates a feeling of emotional safety. But when that financial safety is violated due to traumatic life events, such as divorce or widowhood or anything like that, our feeling of emotional safety begins to erode as well. So when you take those traumatic life events combined with the money scripts from childhood, that's when we really start experiencing financial anxiety due to that trauma. And and I know this gets very personal, but how many of us, and you can, if you want to answer, that's great, but how many of us have experienced a life-changing traumatic event in adulthood? I would guess to say most of us, because we don't live in a leave it to beaver, existence, right? And I know I have. And so trauma resulting from divorce or widowhood, emotional and domestic abuse, all have emotional and financial impact. And the studies for domestic violence show that in 99% of those cases, there is also financial abuse. However, financial abuse is not exclusive to domestic violence. In those cases, it's kind of like the frog in the pot story, right? Maybe you heard this in science class, I don't know. But the story goes that if a frog is dropped into a pot of water, if the water is boiling, the frog is going to try to save itself by jumping out of the pot. But if the frog is put into a pot of room temperature water And then the water is slowly brought to the boiling point. The frog doesn't know any different because the frog adjusts slowly to the temperature of the water, and eventually the frog stays, because the frog is going to stay in the water and eventually it dies, right? So an example we see of this is women who have slowly given their financial power away to their spouses little by little over time. And why does this happen? It's not intentional, but it's usually because of trust on her part. And in many cases, narcissistic, whether it be overt or covert, control and neglect by the other party. So this is kind of similar to the frog in the pot. Over time, she doesn't realize she's slowly being stripped of her financial power. And I've worked with intelligent, gifted, brilliant women who found themselves in these situations. One who's an MBA had no idea that her husband had not paid federal income tax for several years, among other financial catastrophes. She didn't find out until after he passed away. Another, who's a PhD in molecular biology, she wound up having to eat lunch and dinner from the free samples at Sam's Club and staying with friends for 2 years because she was left in such financial dire straits. And the last example is one where the spouse, who had a degree in economics, stayed either chronically unemployed or underemployed for years on end, leaving the wife to continually pick up the financial pieces, knowing that she couldn't leave, and being in a continued state of emotional and financial duress. And so in all of these cases, there was trust on one side and neglect on the other. These women were left to deal with not only the emotional trauma of their situations, but the financial ramifications as well, which strip them of their sense of safety. And so these are the real life stories and situations that are typically not talked about in the industry when we address money stories. And so the money stories from childhood and these traumatic life events create this perfect storm, if you will, of negative self-talk, self-doubt, and financial anxiety that cause money triggers. So now a trigger is an event that reignites the money anxiety. For example, a trigger in one client of mine was when her checking account balance fell below a certain dollar amount. And at that time, she had no other invested assets. Rationally, she knew it didn't make sense because having a lot more money sitting in a checking account meant it wasn't being invested or saved, or earning interest, I should say. And because now, I mean, most checking accounts really are just a conduit to get your money from one place to another, right? But that threshold helped her to feel financially safe, which in turn helped her to feel emotionally safe and temporarily alleviated the anxiety she was feeling. So that trauma, and I want to say too, it's kind of like if you're living in a snow globe, right? Picture a snow globe, and every time a snow globe shakes, right, the whole thing just shakes up. So in these scenarios and situations, it's like you're living inside the snow globe, just waiting for the next shakeup. Because this trauma typically creates a feeling of deprivation, which deprivation is living in this kind of state of emptiness and longing when we don't have our basic needs met, right? It's a wound that develops, again, when our basic needs, whether it be physical, emotional, social, spiritual, and financial, are not met. And so when these needs are not met over a long period of time, that's when this deep, it's like it creates new pathways in the brain. That's what trauma does. And when we peel back the layers of our money behaviors and look at the emotional drivers that got us into unhealthy and stressful financial circumstances, it's almost always by a profound sense of deprivation caused by the trauma. So in the case of trauma and financial anxiety, the result is unhealthy financial behaviors. And, so there are really two questions here. And the first is, how do we prevent these financial situations from happening in the first place? And the second question, of course, is if you've been through a life event that caused financial trauma, how do you move past it and rebuild your life? How do you feel financially and emotionally safe again? So the answer to the first question, and again, this is not, all inclusive, is if you are married and not involved in your household finances, is to get involved. And that's going to have to, take some conversation between you and your spouse. But don't make, it needs to be something that you need to feel very strongly about. And from purely a numbers perspective, the first thing that comes to mind is, how do you make up for all the lost time of not being able to save and invest, right? And that depends on how you look at it. If you're looking at it from strictly a compounding numbers point of view and using the traditional narrative of retirement, then there really isn't enough math that can play catch up. So you have to start thinking differently about what you want your life to look like in going forward. But it also goes deeper than that, because we have to heal the wounds from the trauma that caused the financial distress in the first place. So in the book, The Body Keeps Score, there are numerous examples of the relationship between trauma, safety, and how our bodies manifest that trauma. So one example is stress sleeping. So if you are under a lot of stress, and especially financial stress or duress, you may wake up in the morning and your body may just physically hurt, like all over. And that's because your body is physically holding on to that stress. That's why it is so important that we take this financial care and self-care and we combine it into this financial wellness package, right? Because trauma creates pathways in the brain that need to be healed. And because these trauma situations, leaving her, doubting nearly every single decision she makes, until she's on the path of healing, she's not going to be able to move forward emotionally, much less financially. And for many women who have been through these type of events, this is why they don't engage in their finances, because of these trauma events. And she probably wasn't feeling very confident about the finances before the trauma because of these money scripts from childhood, right? But she's definitely not feeling confident in addressing her finances now. And so in these situations, there's also what's known as emotional trauma bonds, like BONDS, that keep her tied to the situation. So a trauma bond is it's a cycle. It's a cycle of hope and disappointment, hope and disappointment. So as long as she's kept in a state of coming back into emotional hope, it's almost nearly impossible to break that cycle. That's why when we see women who are in these financially abusive types of situations and people say, oh, why don't you just leave? It's so much more than that. First of all, she probably doesn't have the money to leave. Secondly, she's in this emotional cycle of a trauma bond that makes it almost emotionally impossible for her to leave, because she's in this almost constant state of hope. So, and like I was saying before, it's like that snow globe scenario. So what she has to do is she has to start looking at the situation from outside the snow globe in order to start to slowly break that emotional trauma bond tie. And this is hard. I mean, this is hard because, this industry is a very masculine industry. It comes from a strictly numbers point of view. And then we have the shame narrative from certain personal finance celebrities that certainly don't help women feel any better. And in all honesty, this is an industry that was created by men for men. And that's why I'm so thankful to Purse Strings and all of this mission, because, yes, men are important allies in this profession, but we have to look at it for women from a totally different point of view. Because if it was all about the numbers and only about the numbers, we'd all have these perfectly beautiful spreadsheets and net worth statements, right? But we don't. And this is why it is about so much more than just the numbers. It really is also about the neuroscience of the brain. And once you start the healing process of the trauma that caused the financial distress, and we start rewiring our brain to redefine those money scripts from childhood, then you are also in a better place to be able to start recognizing those money triggers and to be able to work through them. So if we really want women to feel confident and beautiful about their finances, we really must first heal the money stories and the trauma that created the financial distress in the first place. And so I'm open to any questions or any comments or feedback or, anything you might want to add to that. Okay, I don't know where Barb and Maggie, are you still there? Oh, hold on one second.
Hi there.
Little technical glitch in there.
Oh, that's okay. I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure. So
We're here hanging on your every word. So it's so interesting, Patty, because you bring up a topic that isn't really talked about very often. It almost, besides money being taboo, the whole thing of trauma in money is even more taboo.
Yeah.
It seems like. But I think, like you say, inherently, many women have suffered from that and may not even know that they're suffering from that.
Absolutely.
I love the resource that you brought up, the Body Keeps Score. Are there other resources that you recommend? Like, I'm thinking, what if you have a girlfriend or a family member that you think might be in this situation?
Mm-hmm.
We're not psychotherapists or anything like that, but are there resources that we can provide or to open the dialogue? Anything like that?
Well, a lot of it depends on the situation. The first piece is obviously, kind of thinking, oh my gosh, maybe I really have been through this situation. I can do a little bit. I can put together a list for you of several resources that she can reach out to. But if you or if anyone is in this type of financially abusive or domestic violence type of situation that is causing that type of trauma, the first thing to do is reach out to your local, like a domestic violence type of organization. I mean, that's the first thing, because you need to be physically safe first, more than anything else. That would be the first thing I would say there. But yeah, the book, the Body Keeps Score, is fantastic. In this profession, I mean, there are definitely, resources and things like regarding financial therapy and financial psychology, but those are more for on the professional level versus on, the consumer level. But I can definitely do a little bit more research on that for you.
Okay, so why don't you describe a little bit of what does it look like to have a healthy financial relationship with money? I hear some women say, well, I get a budget, each month from my husband, he earns the money, so I'm not really part of the financial decision-making process. It's all over the board in whatever that partnership has agreed to or whatever they've just kind of fallen into. So it's different for everybody.
Right. It is different for everybody. So even if you're not part of the day-to-day financial conversations, you still need to be part of what if something happens? Especially when you get to this point in midlife, because, you've got the legacy conversations that need to be had.
Yeah,
those are super important. You need to know that you're going to be financially okay. And for pretty much all of us, it's not about necessarily building wealth for wealth's sake. It's about knowing that we're going to be okay, that we're not going to be dependent on friends, family, the government, or anyone else when we're 80, 90 years old. So even if you're not part, if he makes the money, if you stay home, whatever that agreement is, you still need to be part of knowing what's going on. And knowing where the important documents are, and knowing what the legacy plan is, and all of that. I mean, that's essential. That's absolutely essential. So I would say, now it's going to get tricky in some situations. It's definitely going to get a little tricky, but you both have to be open to and make it like a date night. Make it, favorite beverages, whatever that may be. Get some snacks, some good food or whatever, and make it that kind of a conversation versus just open up a spreadsheet.
You're breaking up a little bit, Patty, so I just want to make sure that we do hear you.
Are you having that drilling going on?
Yeah, I think that's. Yeah,
I think I might need to mute at this point.
Yeah.
Poor thing.
Having some drilling going on in that building.
Yeah.
Facebook Live fun.
Yeah.
And so
the drilling's off now. So let me just jump in. I have another question. Oh, wait. It's crazy over here. But anyway, yeah, it's just about how to, set up the best methodologies, and not only with the money conversations, but one thing that we learned a lot was about power of attorney and how important that document is. And I know you're not an attorney, and neither am I, but that's also an important document that we've learned is really important. And just having these money conversations, when I first started Purse Strings and I was talking about opening these dialogues, one woman said to me, "Are you going to have a divorce attorney in the room at the same time?" Which, really shows how tenuous those conversations can be.
Yeah, it can be. And especially if you're going into those situations, or if you're just coming out of those situations, that is a very traumatic event. So you cannot isolate the financial piece from the emotional piece, because they're both intertwined, and they both cycle with each other. So that's why it's so important to address that trauma and to work on healing that trauma, so that you feel confident about yourself emotionally, and so you feel better than, okay, now and that's not to say it's going to ebb and flow. I mean, there are going to be days when you are still going to feel, oh, I just can't do this. But then there are going to be other days when you keep working on your healing. That's when you work and feel more confident about actually addressing your finances. And so the two totally go hand in hand that way.
Mm-hmm. And I would say, Purse Strings has these professional providers like yourself, Patty. Why don't you talk a little bit about what you do and how you work with women in these types of situations?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So thank you. I appreciate that. So I am a financial wellness advisor. So I work with women typically 40 and older in midlife. And the reason why is because we're not in our 20s anymore. And by the time we get to midlife, many women and, many of my clients have experienced one or more of these types of life-changing events. And so there are a couple of different ways to work with me. I do take that emotional and financial piece and intertwine them together. So that's how we work together. We start with your basic foundation, and then we move forward from there. We deal with the financial pieces, but we also deal with the self-care pieces as well.
That's awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, wonderful. Maggie, any other questions come in?
No, I have some people commenting saying, this is so true, and people are so shy about having these tough conversations and discussing death, especially hard for women who are in an unfavorable situation or have no say, which is really true.
Yes, it is true. And that's why one of my one of my big missions is to open up these conversations and to even allow myself to be vulnerable. And that's the one thing I want to say too. I mean, financial professionals have been through their own stuff too.
Mm-hmm.
So, we're not immune to, dealing with these types of events. So, yeah.
And I was just listening to Arwen Becker's podcast,
She's
and
amazing.
she said, one thing she said, which kind of made me chuckle, is when you're going to see a financial professional, women almost feel the same way as when they're going to a gynecologist, because they do kind of go in and have to meet someone, and you really have to, expose a lot of vulnerabilities, maybe mistakes you've made in the past, maybe, not really good decisions, bad investments, maybe you have a ton of credit card debt, you don't feel good about yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And, how do you know you can trust this person that's not going to judge you or think, oh, this person, made terrible decisions. I mean, there's a lot of judgment and guilt and shame around all of that.
Yeah.
So to feel that you're working with someone, and like we say, always a purse strings approved provider who really has women's, needs and sensitivities front and center, is really important, because these conversations are so, and sometimes you don't get everything in the first, second, third meeting. I had somebody who said, boy, we were in the fifth meeting and all of a sudden she dropped this bomb about something, something financially. And she's like, whoa, you didn't tell me that part of it, because you need to build that trust, that relationship. It's a lot of vulnerability.
Absolutely. And that's why it's so important. It is so important for the advisor to, you should expect when you go to a financial advisor to be in a judgment-free space. It shouldn't have to be advertised. You should expect to be in a judgment-free space. You should expect to be welcomed with open arms. You should expect to be listened to and not feel like you're being talked over, because this industry has its whole language and a whole, lingo all its own. And that's why I think, when I was talking about the statistic earlier of how 80% of financial plans do not get implemented by the client. And that is so disheartening, because, there's another statistic that I didn't mention, is when women experience widowhood, and if the husband has been the one who's been the one dealing with the financial advisor, she's off to find another advisor, because she has not been involved in those conversations that whole entire time. And, half the time she doesn't even know what questions to ask, and it's not because she's not smart. It's, as I mentioned in the conversation before, PhDs I've talked with, MBAs, I mean, that's irrelevant. That doesn't matter. That's totally irrelevant. This is about that whole emotional and financial piece becoming one. And so when we take that, and when you are speaking with an advisor who can work with you on that level, that's when you know that you have someone you can trust.
And that's something we really try hard and build. I mean, we've, from doing so many focus groups with Barb, so many women just say, they don't even look at me. They never talk to me. Like, it's my money. Or even, if you're buying a car and you're with your husband or something, it's your money, it's your car. Why are they asking him, what he wants to do when that's not even his decision? And it blows my mind that people would still give business to people like that, So that's what we're trying to change. And, any purse strings approved provider is not going to be doing that. It's a conversation between both people. I'm not, everyone has to be part of the conversation, come to the table. And, it's not every last purchase you have to know about, but most of them.
Yeah, and the whole reason we started Purse Strings is to, because it's such a sensitive and vulnerable conversation, we provide everything free in terms of resources and tools and education for women to arm themselves and be able to go and have those conversations, and, the trusted provider, the Purse Strings approved provider, so that it's a trusted network. So women don't have to feel like they're going to be taken advantage of, or people don't really have their own, sensitivities or issues at heart, because it's a very vulnerable conversation. But necessary, very necessary for women, because all those financial decisions that are made at the table are going to impact her as she gets older. And if she doesn't understand what's going on, she's going to be one of those ladies like Maggie and I, we've seen in Target and Costco, you know, bagging our groceries or handing out treats or whatever. No more of that. Stops with purse strings. So, so thank you, Patty, for being with us today and sharing such important information and really heeding the call that this is happening out there, and that women have resources in purse strings and in you and other financial providers who are purse strings approved, who can really help them navigate and create their own financial journey.
Awesome. Well, thank you both so much for having me, and thank you all for coming today. It's been my absolute pleasure.
Yeah, it's great. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
So
Patty.
we'll see everyone on here next week. So we'll see everyone soon.
Have a great day. Bye.